I'd like to welcome the people who are here this evening and thank you for being part of Climate Action Week. This is a panel discussion which is focused on food sovereignty as part of climate change awareness. But first, a karakia to open our hui this evening by Matua Dane Tumahai, who is the General Manager in charge of Toi Whenua, and in particular leads the business units of the Mara, revegetation, the nursery itself, our land management group, and as well our landscape group. So over to you, Dane.
Nā me kia koe te matua Rob, me inoi tātou. Whakarongo mai ki te tupua, whakarongo mai ki te tāwhitu. Whakarongo mai ki te hao tāne. Ko te hā tēnei ahu mai te pūpuki, ahu mai te hihiri, ahu mai te māhara. Tēnei te aro mai tō hā, tēnā te aro atu I tuku hā. Ko te hāno whea, ko te hāno tāne, ko te hāno whea, ko te hāno rongo. Ko rongo ki te whakatupua, ko rongo ki te whakatāwhito, ko rongo te mamai aroha, he aroha, hara mai te tōki, a haumi e, hui e, a tai ki e. Let us open our hearts to the divine vibration, open our hearts to the original vibration, open our hearts to the love of humanity, love that originates from the thought, energy and memory of love itself. You give me love, I return my love to you. Love originating from the base of humanity, love originating from the foundation of peace, the divine peace, the original peace, the external peace that extends love to all. Let us engrave these words for eternity. Unite, let us be one. We have united in conscious thought. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Nā mihi nui ki a koe, Dane. Folks, we live in a world today that's focused increasingly on convenience. And it seems this is driven by a desire, by commerce at least, to tempt us at every corner. Largely this appeals to us in a very superficial way. It's only in my lifetime that the production of food has become so processed, and a home garden, so much part of my childhood in the 40s and 50s, has largely disappeared. As our global population has burgeoned, the demand for mass production of food has grown along with it. And along with that, extensive use of chemicals to control diseases and to feed plants, export of food around the world, which produces an enormous carbon footprint, a lack of control over the chemicals that we ingest through our food, consciously or unconsciously, and engineering of genetic material with little concern of the unintended consequence of the artificial recombination of DNA. Food sovereignty puts us back in control of our food, and more directly, the ways in which we control our health through what we eat. This has led to movements such as permaculture, the soil food web development, the Maori principles of hua, para kore, and of other generation of ideas which take us back to earlier means of food production. And at the heart of hua para kore is a deep respect which should prevail through Aotearoa of a respect for Papa Tuanuku, to Mother Earth. This evening we're going to hear from some case studies and principles of food sovereignty that have occurred across Tāmaki Makaurau. You can pose questions on the chat space and we'll address this with each speaker as we progress. So let's start with our first speaker, who is, of course, Hana Maihi. Kia ora, Hana.
Kia ora koutou, tōtahira I mihi ana ki a koe e Dane, I tō karakia me ngā mihi ki te wāhi ngaro. I mihiana kia koutou, kua tai mai nei ki tēnei kaupapa, ki tēnei kōrero, he mihi aroha kia koutou. Kia ora, my name is Hannah. I hail from Ngāti Whātua and have a couple of other connections too, to the Waikato, to Waihua, Ngāti Paoa, Tauranga Moana. And I'm fortunate to be part of the team here at Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, Whaimaia, and Ōrākei Marae, who have been part of some of the awesome kai initiatives that you'll get to hear about. So without further ado, I'm just going to share my screen and play a bit of a video to show the highlights of what we've been up to over the last year or so, where COVID has really made it quite apparent how reliant our current food, or how reliant we are on our kind of global food system, but also the opportunity that presented for us to return to some of the practices and values of our tupuna and our ancestors. So bear with me as I share my screen. So here we've got kōrero, where Rob and the team designed an awesome Para Kai. Ephraim and the team of gardeners have been planting seasons of crops since October last year, and this is some of the harvest that the kai that's been distributed out to our whānau. Our kaumata have loved it, as you can tell by their faces.
And we've done some pretty cool initiatives in terms of getting some different videos out over the comms, in terms of how to prep, say, marakai in your backyard, as well as how to start vegetable seeds. We've also given about 3,000 vegetable starts to whānau members over this period of time as well. So a lot of amazing stuff happening.
Also part of the COVID response was just giving out kai packs. Not everything we can give is grown on the whenua, but it was important to make sure that our whānau had access to healthy kai and the resources that they need to stay well. So this is part of the kai on the fly packs to kaumātua, so they didn't have to venture out to supermarkets, and also to our most vulnerable whānau. This is just some of the mahi that many other Māori communities in iwi and hapu are doing across Aotearoa. Yes, so that's just a little highlight reel of some of the mahi that our whānau and our kaimahi have been up to. But I think it's important to go back to the kaupapa that has called us all to this this kōrero. Kai sovereignty. What is kai sovereignty? He ha te rangatiratanga te kai. For me, I turn back to whakapapa. Whakapapa is the origins and the place where we start. And similar to many other iwi and hapu, kai is a very core part of who we are, our culture and our pūrākau, our histories. For Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, kai is at the very heart of how we ended up in Aotearoa, through our tupuna Rongomai and Rongoatu, two brothers who quarrelled over their mara kai, their kumara grounds, which led to the now known phrase of tuakana kumara. And there's so many teachings and learnings and principles that we can continue to take from those ancestral teachings, that kōrero tuku iho that's been handed down. So yeah, kai is really important to us. It's in our pūrākau, it's in our whakapapa. I think it's important to acknowledge that our tupuna, as we talk about climate change and decarbonising our society and our industries, is actually our ancestors had the blueprint. They lived low carbon lifestyles. They lived in tune with the rhythms and the cycles and abundance of the taiao. The likes of Ririata Mākiha really capture the ngako of that kōrero, talking about maramataka and how our indigenous way of understanding time and space was a practice and a I guess belief system, a way of being that originated back in our Pacific origins, that we carried over across Te Moana Nui a Kiwa, over to Aotearoa, where our tupuna were able to adapt and acclimatise some of those practices and the kai brought here. Yeah, so I think it is important when we're talking about kai sovereignty to go back to those origins, and to also understand how some of those practices and understandings were disrupted. And so Ririata has, if you haven't already heard his kōrero, he talks about the colonization of our time. And I would say that goes hand in hand with the colonization of our puku and our arero, the colonization of our language, the loss of our language, the loss of whenua, and therefore the loss of our ability to grow the taonga species of kai that our tupuna used to survive off. And what we do know is that in particular for Tāmaki Makaurau, we were able to still have, I guess, living memory of some of those practices around kai, around the tikanga that helped us maintain the balance of us wanting an abundance of kai, but also knowing that the environment isn't an unlimited source of it. It requires us to play a role in our taiao, and the likes of Robin Kimura really highlight, Indigenous Canadian ecologists highlight that, you know, we've got the opportunity as tangata, as people, to serve a role in our ecosystem, and that can be either a koha or a hoha. We can either do our part to improve our environment and make sure we can still survive, or we can be a hoha, which maybe I'd argue is the current case with all the waste and rubbish and pollution that we're currently trying to grapple with and problem solve. So yeah, I just want to acknowledge all the hardworking people that have been doing a lot of work around our marakai, mahinga kai, whakapapa, reo, reclamation. All of that reclamation is a key part of kai sovereignty from my perspective. And it's all important, but where do we begin? I think for Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, from our perspective, what we were really lucky to still have is some of the kōrero tuku iho that reminds us of those ancestral ways of being, where we didn't stay just in one spot. We were harvesting all over our rohe, moving across to different areas that had different pātaka kai, that had different types of kai and food that could sustain our people. I remember actually walking up, if you haven't already, walk up Maunga Kia or Maunga Whau, Mount Haurere, some of the ancestral maunga and volcanic cones in Tāmaki Makaurau, and more often than not, you'll find, if you look hard enough, little remnants of shell. And those little remnants of shell are often referred to as midden. And midden were essentially the rubbish pits or rubbish tip of our tupuna when they were living on those cones and cultivating kai. And some say up to that kai was cultivated a kilometre out from the cone. So you can imagine the extent of kai production that existed in those times pre-European settlement. These midden, I think, is a really important, it highlights just the legacies that we choose to leave. And it's interesting, I think, to note that the midden is essentially the legacy that they've left us. That's the remnant of their rubbish pile that we've got. And I think to our current generation and our rubbish tip, and what are we leaving behind? And I think it's far more astronomical than what we've been left. So therein lies, I guess, a bit of a self-reflection and whirl around how can we start to change that legacy from being one of para, of rubbish and a problem and a burden for the next generation, and make it one of abundance. So I'll leave that to koha, but I thought it's a really important note to go, actually these ancestral landscapes that we're still lucky to have, it's important that we look after them, that we regenerate them, so that we can continue to take on the learnings that they so generously offer us. Not sure of how much time I have, so Rob, rein me in if you need. Kai sovereignty, you know, you can't talk about sovereignty without talking about te tiriti o Waitangi. Sovereignty doesn't have a direct translation into te reo, but rangatiratanga over our taonga is, you know, often a phrase referred to. And, you know, taonga being kai, language, land, you know, there's so many aspects that we treasure within Māori culture that are key to understanding the importance of self-determination, especially when it comes to our kai. And yeah, the reality is that many of the options that our whānau have now don't allow for that rangatiratanga necessarily. It's a lot harder to choose to, you know, make time to grow your own kai that's free of pesticides, that, you know, supports local seed banks. And that's some of the aspirations and moemoia that the team at Pourewa and Ōrākei have been starting and nurturing and growing and spreading across whānau. And that started, I think, also back to a conversation when the land was returned. So in the 1950s, Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei was essentially left with an urupā amount of land, but with the treaty settlement that whenua was, or part of that whenua was able to be returned. And with that, the vision of we wanted to return our kai and our manu to our whenua. And with that comes that you have to grow trees, you have to grow rako and all sorts of kai. And so that's really what we've seen over the last 20 years with the likes of Shah and her generation who started that. And my generation then also being able to grow up with that as a norm, that we're starting to normalize these ancestral practices that continue on that whakapapa, that legacy of caring for whenua that will ultimately care for us. I think I'm running out of time, but I just wanted to give a shout out to all our hard working kaimahi, passionate kaimahi who have been putting I guess themselves to the kaupapa of serving a kaupapa bigger than themselves, and making sure that collectively we can work together to grow our resilience and grow our knowledge of how we can feed one another, but also care for one another, and manaakitanga, bringing that back, which is a tikanga that our oldies have carried through right from the papakainga down at Okahu Bay. They always talked about not having much in terms of money, but what they did have, they shared and made the most of. And so manaakitanga was always continued on despite the challenges and the hardships. And I guess that's what COVID is also realizing today, is that we still have that within our hapu and our whānau. And it's probably one of the strengths that we can offer in terms of the global challenge of climate change, how we work together and yeah, to support one another.
No, mihi, Hannah, that's really an interesting background, and I think that would be very useful for people to understand, I suppose, the construct of today's presentation. So, ngā mihi nui ki a koe. I haven't picked up any questions as yet for Hannah, but if you've got any, just leave them on the chat room and address them to me, and I'll field them as we go along. In the meantime, it's my pleasure to introduce Koha Kahui McConnell, who's going to talk about his Hua Para Kore agenda. Over to you, Koha.
Ngā mihi, Rob. Ngā mihi, Hannah, for your wonderful introduction. Real quick, I will just share my screen. Sweet. Everybody see that? Awesome, ka rawe. Tēnā tātou katoa, ko ai tēnei e tuaki nei, ko Pirongia me mokotahi o ku maunga, ko Waikato me Waikokupu o ku awa, ko Ngāti Parau me Ngāti Maniapoto o ku iwi, ko Ngāti Rongomai Wahine me Ngāti Kinohaku o ku hapu, ko Koha tōku ingoa, kei Tāmaki Makaurau ahau e noho ana, ko Para Kore Ki Tāmaki tōku mahi. So, yeah. I thought I would start off this talk by saying what food sovereignty means to me and what hua para kore means to me. And there's actually a whakatauki that I think perfectly encapsulates that, which is he kai te rongoa, he rongoa te kai. Food is the medicine and the medicine is food. So strictly speaking, hua para kore is an indigenous method of growing and cultivating food. A return to Mātauranga Māori and the mana and agency that comes with it. Understanding the whakapapa of the whenua and the maramataka that is built within it. Understanding the wairua that is ever present within the whenua and the responsibility and care that comes with growing kai. Within this return to indigenous knowledge, we find sovereignty. Taking control of your own production in a mana enhancing way. Respecting the atua and their domains, listening to the knowledge that the whenua holds and educating our tamariki about the strength that comes with that knowledge. As I said before, I work for Para Kore Ki Tāmaki. Our primary goal is to deliver zero waste messages to Māori communities by going into their marae, evaluating their current waste systems, asking and seeing what they would like to do within these waste systems, and seeing how we can help them change their current waste practices from being linear to circular. Working in this space, I've learned the scope of the waste management issue when it comes to food waste specifically, and a lot of the associated climate impacts. But I've also learned of some of the fantastic and amazing work that's happening and the efforts and products of that work, both communally and systemically. So as of 2019, Auckland Council has declared not only a climate emergency, but also a goal to be zero waste by 2040. So the photos that you're seeing from left to right is the School Strike for Climate in 2019, and then the subsequent declaration of the climate emergency by Auckland Council in the town hall. Both of these goals are incredible and really, really respectable and are great steps forward, but they still require a lot of systemic support to achieve what they want to achieve. Currently, Tāmaki Makaurau sends around about 200,000 tonnes of waste to the landfill every year, with approximately 45% of that waste stream being food and a further 10% being garden waste. Just to put that into perspective, that's about 26 blue whales per week in landfill. And I think I'm not alone in admitting that these figures give me a little bit of anxiety. Change is coming, however. Auckland Council recently announced that following the success of the curbside compost pickups in the North Shore and South Auckland, that they're going to be expanding that service to all of Auckland, so ka rawe to them. One of the most important parts of my job is instilling effective waste separation techniques to anybody who'll listen, and teaching rangatahi and tamariki of this generation and the next what happens to their waste once it leaves their hands, the effects and lifetime production and production methods of plastics, so that when they become consumers, they can make informed decisions on the types of products that they're using. As of this year and last, Para Kore Ki Tāmaki have been fortunate enough to be involved with 7 schools, around about 740 students, primarily in the South Auckland region. This has actually been a collaborative effort with my other kaupapa experiencing marine reserves. So we deliver zero waste messaging through presentations and games, educating young minds about where our waste ends up after it goes in the bin, the effects on the water table and the whenua, and how those effects currently affect our terrestrial and marine ecosystems. In the presentations that we deliver to these kura, we approach the issue with the intent to impart as much compassion for te taiao onto them as we do. We also want to try and connect them and their whānau to te taiao through a hands-on experience. We use imagery of marine and terrestrial animals to show the direct consequences of our current practices, and we educate them about what they can do to affect change in their local community. From these teachings, 3 schools developed really, really awesome action projects directly related to waste, ranging from beach cleanups and drain audits to actually creating their own signage for their in-school bins so that they can educate their fellow students, their peers, and subsequent students that will come along. We believe that by teaching these waste separation techniques, we can influence these young people on how to take ownership of their relationship to te taiao, and from that relationship, begin to learn how to grow and harvest their own kai. During this current lockdown period, Para Kore Ki Tāmaki has committed to upskilling ourselves in composting knowledge and gardening techniques. And I want to give a massive shout out to Therese for taking the time to actually teach us those techniques. She's a fantastic teacher, and she's been kind enough to do that throughout this entire lockdown period. So ngā mihi, Therese. We have the hope, the aspiration that using these techniques that we're going to learn, we'll be able to run an entire program in these kura. The end goal of that program is to set up community gardens and develop seed libraries and nurseries to help grow the biodiversity of our native trees and our food plants. Currently, not only in Aotearoa, but globally, we're losing our biodiversity of not only our ngahere, but of our food too. As an example, we'll take my favorite type of food, the humble potato. So globally, there are about 4,000 different types of potato, right? Most of them are found in the Andes, but in Aotearoa alone, we commonly grow and sell around about 200 varieties just within Aotearoa. This is just one example that I could think of in terms of the loss of biodiversity within our kai. This restriction has impacts not only on the environment, as it leaves a lot of the crops open to disease due to cloning, but it also has an impact on our gut health. So everybody in their gut has what's called a microbiome, and it's everywhere. And a lot of that microbiome is maintained by ingesting different types, varying types of flora and fauna, different types of plants, different types of meats, everything, right? And restricting that ingestion means that your gut's microbiome becomes less and less equipped to deal with diseases such as IBD or inflammatory bowel disease. One of the unavoidable things that comes with food production and the system that we currently use is actually the amount of emissions and plastic waste that is produced by the agriculture industry, and by extension, supermarkets. As of 2019, the agriculture industry created 39 metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions, most of which was methane, contributing to almost half of the gross emissions for that entire year. One of the steps that I personally have taken to try and stop contributing to those emissions is adopting a vegetarian-based diet with a view to be plant-based as soonish. I still like meat, but soonish, it's coming. So a recent study conducted by Oxford University in collaboration with Massey, Victoria and Auckland University, with support from the New Zealand Greenhouse Gas Emissions Research Centre and the Ministry for Primary Industry, detailed that by adopting a plant-based diet, the individual can decrease their daily dietary emissions from 6.3 kilograms per day to about 4.8. So just in this graph that you're seeing here, the dashed areas represent the emissions generated due to waste, and the solid areas represent the emissions due to consumption. Dietary guide, DG, DG stands for dietary guide, and DG minus meat stands for dietary guide minus meat. Dietary guide just means changing from a meat-based diet to a plant-based diet or vegetarian-like. So it is worth mentioning that while in the short term, the emissions created from the switch in diet are they're demonstrable and they are significant, these numbers do even out, as you can see in this graph, over time. And a lot of that is because of the accumulation of the CO2 that's produced from meat substitutes that people will, start consuming because people like meat. There are a couple of nutritional concerns that have been brought up in that same paper. just around iron deficiencies and protein deficiencies, as they're quite common in plant-based diets, but I think that's all part and parcel of the switch. Speaking personally, this switch to a vegetarian diet has encouraged me to grow my own food and thereby eliminating a lot of the packaging that comes with the supermarkets altogether. Over the past 12 months, I've taken a real interest in learning how to effectively bokashi and grow my own food and also make my own bread. This is a picture of the first rewana that I ever made. Yeah. During this time, I've personally, again, noticed a massive decrease in the amount of plastics that I'm consuming, that I'm actively no longer purchasing. And I think when we talk about these systemic and cultural changes, I think it's also important to put them into context, right? Auckland City is a city with a population of 1,630,000 people. It's a lot of people. Presenting these large issues of carbon emission and plastic consumption to the wider public with no real alternative to the system that they currently operate in, I think it only serves to grow guilt and anxiety when they're buying food. My personal belief is that we should encourage home growing as a human right, not only on a personal level, but on a community level as well. Currently, I rent with my flatmate and my partner. And while renting, I've come across a couple of issues or challenges, should I say, when trying to grow my own kai. We aren't really able to compost that effectively because we don't really have anywhere to put that compost, the products of that compost, because we're not allowed to start a garden bed in our front yard, which is why I've had to build the planter box that you see there. And in the past, we've actually had to sneakily bury our bokashi in our front yard. Please don't tell my landlord. While this is a challenge, thankfully, I've become aware of a service from the Compost Collective called Share Waste. Yeah, it's a really, really cool initiative. It does what it says on the can. It gives you the option of saying, I have compost and I'd like to give it to somebody, or I have scraps and I'd like to give it away to somebody. It's an initiative that I'm actually going to start taking on personally. One of the things that I think is an acceptable solution or an acceptable kind of initiative to try and start is actually using berms, publicly using berms to grow kai. Yeah, I think that this public use of berms has the opportunity and the potential to make some really, really wicked and innovative communal and individual strides when it comes to personal seasonal food production. It's something that I'm actually looking at doing for my own life in my own neighborhood. There's a couple of things to consider when looking at putting in food on a berm. For example, it's better to put food on a berm if you live in a cul-de-sac or not on a main road or not on a bus line. So personally for us, we live on a bus line, which means that we couldn't really plant anything too close to that bus line. And the bus actually stops not too far from my house. But alternatively, there's a couple of berms just around the corner that I've been eyeing up. And I think that a great way to start, and I'd like to thank Therese for this little bit of knowledge, is the way to start those types of initiatives is connections. Make sure that you go over to your neighbor's place and say, hey, do you mind if I do this thing and this? All of these food sovereignty and hua para kore things come back to community, and they come back to having good relationships with the people around you. I think this initiative of planting up berms has really, really, really massive potential for encouraging a return to non-possessive sharing. Something that I came across during this presentation is the term food insecurity. It was something that I was aware of and I knew of, but I didn't have a term for it. To surprise absolutely no one, food insecurity is common in low-income areas and is the cause of a lot of psychological stress. And I think that this return to hua para kore, this return to kai sovereignty, this return to cultivating your own seasonal kai is something that can help to address this insecurity. The best example of para kore, hua para kore and seasonal production that I can think of is the Ōrākei community garden that was there for a while. and my mum would bring me out to help there. Growing up in West Auckland, this food insecurity was something that was real and tangible, kind of knowing that we're no more than a week away from having no food. These gardens helped to make sure that there was always something on the table at dinner time. It helped to provide our family with proper seasonal nutrition, and it gave me the privilege of interacting with members of the community that I otherwise never would have met. From Kai, a young man with a brain injury due to a car accident, to two Kiribati nationals who barely spoke English, but they understood the universal language of cultivating food. And man, they were some of the hardest working individuals I've ever met. To Kim, a young woman who would ride her bike from West Auckland all the way to Ōrākei, and she would feed the stray cats in Greyland on the way. I think this sense of community and communal sharing is something that's been lost in central Auckland. It's still alive and well in South Auckland though, as exemplified by Papatūānuku Kōkiri Marae. I love this marae, big ups to that rōpū, doing amazing work. It's exemplified perfectly by their kaiika and their marakai. Big ups to that rōpū. As of the time of me presenting, they have managed to rescue 161,000 kilos of fish frame and feed approximately 50 families from their marakai. This is the best example of hua para kore and kai sovereignty that I can ever display. Big ups to those rōpū. So I'm going to deviate a little bit. During this presentation, I've spoken about hua para kore and the things that I have been privileged enough to be a part of. But I want to highlight an issue, a much larger issue that has to do with the overarching theme of this festival, which is climate change. I am so sick of climate change being put on the individual. Just like how individuals were typically blamed for their consumption and disposal of plastics instead of, the companies that are making them. A lot of the messaging that we're fed is that it's up to the individual to do something about climate change. And I 100% agree. There are a lot of things that the individual can do to take steps to make a communal change. But I think that negates the larger issue on hand. As individuals, or even as a collective, we make nowhere near as much of an impact on the environment or the greenhouse gas emissions as your average corporation. In 2018, the United Nations released a climate report where individuals were instructed to minimize their carbon footprint by carpooling or using public transport and minimizing their meat consumption. I agree. These are great things to take on board. But I also think that it's important to note that 70% of the world's greenhouse gases can be attributed to 100 global companies that seem to have little to no regard for their own responsibility in creating these emissions. My prime example was actually the lockdowns last year. Across 69 countries, emissions per country dropped 17%. In Aotearoa specifically, it dropped by about 11% over that lockdown period. And I mean, that's pretty obvious. We didn't drive, we didn't go anywhere, we didn't fly anywhere, but it barely made a dent. That drop in the CO2 emissions barely made a dent in the global production of greenhouse gases, showing now more than ever that while the individual can, should, and often does take responsibility for their emissions that we create, they pale in comparison to these large multinational corporations. Yes, I believe that we should all make individual changes and collectively change our behavior for the better. But I also think that without active changes to central policy and pressure from governments and the public, the issue will not be changed. Hua para kore and food sovereignty is a return to Mātauranga Māori and a working in the ways of our tupuna. As Rob said at the beginning of this panel, it's within the space of a generation that the ability to grow and harvest your own kai has become something of a rarity. These traditions, these tikanga, maramataka of cultivating and maintaining and harvesting kai are intrinsic to Māori identity. In a modern context, it's about affecting change within yourself and your whānau so that you can in turn affect change in your community. It's about connections to the people around you And it's about taking that first step and finding knowledge holders that exist not only in the physical, but in the terrestrial as well. And on that note, I would like to thank my mum. My mum gave me the tools and the lessons to make change, not only in myself, but in the people around me. She is, was, and always will be the knowledge holder that I aspire to be someday, embodying both hua para kore and food sovereignty. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Ngā mihi there, Koha. Obviously your passion shines through your presentation, but also I think you've made some excellent points. A question that we've had is, can you give us a better definition of a linear versus a circular flow in terms of kai?
Yeah, in terms of kai, yeah, absolutely. So a linear journey for kai would be if you were to purchase it from the supermarket. Actually, let's go a few steps further back. So a farmer grows the kai, puts a lot of effort into it. He then sells that to distribution companies who then take it out into the supermarket. You then buy that food from the supermarket. You use what you care about, and then you throw the rest into a landfill bin, which then gets taken to the transfer station, which then gets taken to, landfill, buried, it makes methane and all that kind of bad stuff, right? That's a linear kind of progression. Whereas a circular progression would be to, for example, we'll take that same entire process until it gets to you. What you can do to affect change there is to compost it and then put that back into the whenua, right? It's no longer being turned straight into a line. It's going back into something that can be absorbed by the whenua. So at Para Kore, we have a little bit of like I don't want to call it a limerick, but can't think of another term, which is, if it comes from Papatū Anaku, it can return to Papatū Anaku, right? So even something as simple as the next time that you are doing your gardening, right? Instead of throwing those garden trimmings into the landfill bin, put them under a tree. Put them somewhere that the earth, Papatū Anaku, can actually absorb those nutrients, take back those nutrients and put them back into the cycle.
Great answer. Thanks, Koha. And Geraldine comments that the work's awesome. And she loves the idea of converting a linear to a circular flow in terms of waste. Have you thought about expanding zero waste programs to schools throughout Auckland, and also collaborating with bodies that are linked with HOSPO to encourage the use of non-plastic, non-environmental takeaway packaging? We'd love to see Auckland Council roll out collection bins for commercially compostable food packaging also. Thanks. So just your comments on that.
Yeah, no. So currently we are looking at developing our full kura program, as I've said. Because we are a council-funded organisation, that does mean we do have kind of contractual obligations, right? So we are contracted to deliver to Māori communities, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we can't deliver to schools, right? We would absolutely expand this to as many schools that want to hear about it, or anybody that wants to hear about it. In terms of the commercial composting and partnering up with businesses, early on in Para Kore, we tried to partner with a lot of businesses, but it felt like a lot of the talks and a lot of the messages that we were trying to share weren't sticking. And in terms of the commercial composting from businesses, I 100% agree. It would be fantastic to see these businesses given the systemic support to be able to, effectively compost the things that they're wanting to do, right? Like a lot of businesses now have the cardboard containers instead of plastic and polystyrene ones, right? Yeah, it'd be awesome to see those systemic changes. But again, I think the thing that we're seeing is that those containers are designed to be taken away with you. So if you've got that bin system at your storefront, then it's not really doing any good because the person's walked away with it. And when they get to their home or anywhere else, they still don't have that systemic support to be able to compost it effectively.
Ngami. I think there will come a time when this vegetative waste and food waste will be seen as a resource. Currently, it's not, but I think there's a revolution which is emerging in the production of kai generally, and then this will become an important agenda. But thank you so much for your presentation. Your passion's so obvious, and ko tino pai tōna mahi e hoa. So thank you, Koha. Wonderful presentation. I'd now like to invite Shah Bailey to give her presentation. I should say, Shah is someone who's been involved through Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei on the land at Whenua Rangatira for a long time. And in that, she's done some awesome work with her and one of the leaders of the trust, Ngārimu Blair. So big ups to both you, Shah, and Ngārimu. And if you can stop sharing your screen now, Koha, we'll get Shah underway. Kia ora e hoa.
I think Wyatt was going to share the screen for me because I often have technical difficulties. Kia ora, everyone. Kia ora koutou. Ngā mihi to you, Rob. Ngā mihi also to Dane. Thank you for opening us up for this evening and wrapping us with the karakia so that we can have real and safe conversations, which means you're more than welcome, everyone, to put those questions in the chat for any of us as you think of them. We like a good conversation. For those of you that don't know me, ko Charmaine Bailey Tukunua. I'm a restoration ecologist, provision practitioner. I'm passionate about the connection between ngāhere, people, kai, and education. I believe they all go together. And I've got the privilege tonight to be with Hannah and Wyatt and Rob and Koha. Koha's awesome to work with, so I hope you're all jealous. Because I have the privilege of being able to share a little bit of the early stories of the Whenua Rangatira restoration. And Wyatt really kindly today, he found a map that I have never seen. So maybe we'll start there. Wyatt, are you going to do that thing you did? Because it made me go, wow. The first map, I believe, is the 1940s. Is that right?
Wyatt, you're on mute.
Aloha mai, just having a bit of a technical difficulty. Give me 1 second.
Just talk quietly amongst yourselves.
So yeah, so as I said, this is the first time second time, this is the first time I've seen it today, these particular maps. And so it's the 1940s, revealing, and Wyatt, this is current now?
Yep.
Is that correct?
This is current.
Yeah. With many people comes great change, right? And what I love about it is there's plenty still to do. That's a challenge. But we'll start, I suppose, after this. And also the lack of boats and the increase in boats, and now the boats have gone again. So I think that's a beautiful change too. But I'll start my story only back in the year 2000, not that too far back actually. And what happened back in 2000 was that the Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei were developing a management plan for the Whenua Rangatira. And there was 102 submissions towards that plan, asking for more. What they were asking for was to address the issues that were currently on the whenua, which was flooding, erosion. We had all the birds gone. where are the resources? Where was the ngāhere? There was a bit, but some remembered a lot more, and they wanted to see a lot more yet. So in that first year in 2000, we spent the year going out and asking more questions of those same people that had made those submissions, and more again to see, well, what is it that you would like to see? What should be here? And actually too, in my journey of learning, I didn't know much at that stage, and we built a team around us. Ngāti was learning, I was learning, and everyone else, and we came and we learned for that year of what needed to be there, what could be there, and what could be there again. So Wyatt, if you go to the next slide. And this was some of the menu. We had a menu for the whenua rangatira. We had manu went on our menu at that stage. What was obvious was they went on anybody's menu at that stage. So we came up with their menu, and we looked at the fact that kīreru have 74 different species that they eat from. And that wowed me, and on it went. And what did a tui need? And should we go for a kōkako? And we learned that how high the tree needed to be able to swoop, and that wouldn't be possible. So we had a huge menu, and then we pared it back to what was possible again, to be able to re-inhabit a ngāhere on the whenua rangatira. And we got our wish list, and then we looked for seeds. We're like, where are we going to get these things from? So we developed quite an extensive list, and over the years we knocked off the ones that were impractical, because it's really hard to get seabirds to nest in the cliffs of the whenua rangatira when you've got the traffic lights of Tāmaki Drive below. So it was not so much what time period or ecology you could go back to, but what could actually survive and thrive and do well on the whenua rangatira again. We looked for everything to do with those plants in terms of the menu, as I said, for the ecology. Ecology came first. Wyatt, would you like to go to the next slide? But we live there too. So of course, we needed the provision and that restoration for pāharakeke, for kia, for toi, for kai, for the things that you had to have to make kai, harvest kai, everything to do with kai. As well as all the things that were fun, and needed to be restored. So tukutuku panels at that stage, there was 89 of them that were being restored for the wharenui. So we got that menu again. It was now our menu, it was our provision menu, and we started just putting plants in as fast as we could before someone told us we weren't supposed to plant there. They had made an incredible big drain and spent a hell of a lot of money on it all along the cliff tops to stop the overland sheeting of water. And I remember getting growled at the first planting seasons because I had planted the drain, and we were standing there on a community planting day arguing that, well, you won't need the drain by the time we're finished with all the planting. And by the time the children kind of set in on the engineer, he had given up by the end of the planting day and was planting with us. So you can do great things with plants. You can change the minds of men that thought there was only ever one way, as long as you take the time to discuss it and you provide kai. So the second menu, which we entered at the same time, was the provision menu. So next one, Wyatt. Okay, so this actually came after, and in a lot of restoration projects, what we found across Tāmaki was actually people made nurseries and then did restoration, but we had a little bit of a hiccup on the whenua rangatira where we had to prove that we could first, that would be possible. And so for the first couple of years, because the plants weren't grown local to the whenua, they really struggled. They came out of well-nurtured, sheltered nurseries. We were requesting things like kumaraho that didn't like potting mix and to go into the dry cliffs, and they were coming out of these beautiful well-fed places and absolutely sulking. And what we found was when we put a nursery up in the wind and exposed to all the elements of the whenua rangatira, the plants were conditioned better. And that was our first early lessons back in 2004, was if you want to grow things well, grow them to the conditions where they're going to go. get them from the place that they're going to be. And so that's not beyond eco-sourcing. This was rākau whenua, how I described to know the whakapapa of each seed, where it has come, how it will grow, what it wants to be, to go into the same conditions. And don't mother it if it's going into the wind. It's not going to thank you when you take a toddler and throw it out to the storm. So harden it first. So they were slower growing. It was a harder nursery. It was not weed free. Some of those are very deceptive kind of photos. Must have been taken on the pretty days. It was organic. There were weeds there. There was plenty of mahi to do. In terms of the circular economy that Koha was talking about before, we had different arborists from around the city would drop us off mulch. We would put it onto the beds. That would help with retain the moisture, reduce the weeds. Then after a couple of years, it had rotten down enough, we would dig it all out and take it to our community gardens. So everything there was recycled and recycled again. And even I remember my brother building bamboo walls for us to stop the wind, because we said no more plastic in the nursery. We're not having any more of that plastic shade cloth ever again. So that was him for a week with a saw and a bamboo wall to be built. So on the whenua rangatira, we got the menu and then we worked out how. And the nursery was a very big learning curve. We started in a sand pit and we grew 45,000 plants and babies out of a puna sand pit that the children used to play in with a cover on it. So the evolution of the whenua rangatira started with a wheelbarrow and a sand pit, and we're off. Okay, now my hardest thing to do today was to delete photos. I found an old slide. These are all old photos. So I'm probably olden times. These photos, there were so many, and it reminded me that in the 16 years that I worked on, I have the privilege of working on the whenua rangatira with Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, and on an average of at least 4 a year, just for the weekend plantings, thousands came and shared, because Ngāti Me Blair keeps putting out this notice that said many hands make light work, and people heard that and they read it and they joined us, and it was about the kai. That's what they reckoned. They kept saying, oh, we'd only come for the kai, but it just wasn't true. They planted thousands and thousands of plants. They brought their children. Yvonne, who's down in the bottom left-hand corner, she's showing you a picture, if you can't see it on your screen, she's showing you a picture of all the plant names that she had to learn as part of the Community Coordinators Training Program. It was a collaborative program to sharing knowledge between Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei and Kaipātiki Project on the North Shore. They came and they did different sites. They did 12 sites a winter, and they came and they learned, and they'd go, I'm remembering my plant names today. And it was never just about the labor. It was never just about the light, many hands make light work. It was many minds come together to remember what our ngāhere is. And so everybody, anyone that's been to a planting day with me knows that you're tortured with you're not allowed to go home until you've learnt 10 plant names. Before you plant your plant, learn your plant name, introduce yourself, have a relationship with your ngāhere. This is not just about labour hire. We can get the guys to do that during the week. And the guys during the week had to do that too. So Community Planting Day on the whenua rangatira was about sharing knowledge going home. It was never about the free labour. It was always about how much can we pay you, and knowing what it was that you did today, what you connected with, if you could eat it or not. And while I was sitting here listening to Koha, I thought, I'll do a quick quiz with myself and see how many plants I can remember that we could have eaten, and I got up to 22 species. So just off the bat, and there's probably twice as much of that as that, there's at least 20 to 30 species of plants in the whenua rangatira that you can eat from. that are for us as well as the birds. The faux that is also on this slide is in maunga faux. We plant that because it's the lightest wood and you can use that for the fishing floats. We have connection from the whenua to the moana, from our own practice, from money to our own provision. So everything was for more than just one thing, but the main thing was, didn't matter how old you were, you didn't get out of learning your plant names. So, yeah, we have to. So, as I said, thousands of people did thousands of hours, always learning those plants as they went. Sorry, Wyatt, can you just go back one quickly?
No need to apologise.
Sarah was telling me it was okay to apologise. The other thing I wanted to talk to actually, and the reason why we were doing this rather than just about food and kai and birds and learning our plant names, having a kai and sharing that together, was because these ecosystems are endangered, and across Tāmaki, our food and our ngāhere is endangered when our ecosystem is. We know that you can't go and eat a kōrero now, and not in my lifetime have I ever been told that it's okay to do that. What really worries me now is not that we're starting to turn the tide and that the goal will be that we will have flocks flying again, but that what is happening on the land is also happening in the moana. So my favorite food that I have grown up with in my lifetime that now I wouldn't dare to eat, it is kōrero. And so what is happening has been happening on our land for the last couple of generations is now happening in the water on the far side of these pictures. We now have to have rahui to look after our endangered ecosystems in our moana, and that's the next sources of food that we are losing so fast. And the answer to that is plant a tree. Respect the rahui, leave that kai alone, let it recover, let those ecosystems restore themselves, and while we wait, plant another tree, because it's the sediment runoff, it's the overtaking, that not understanding, and the damage we're doing through different practices of those ecosystems in the moana. So it's very easy to show you slides now of the work we've done on the whenua rangatira, but it's all connected. And I just wanted to really emphasize that point, that we've already lost kōrero as a kai in our previous generations, not in my lifetime. For my children to lose all the kai moana as well, while they're working out how to restore the kai from the whenua is a craziness. So we can act on land for what the moana needs to. Thank you, Wyatt. Now please go to the next slide. Okay, and because I used to always have a saying that we cannot live by karaka alone, and I have to say that at the beginning of my mahi on the whenua rangatira, I was still being asked by kuia, like Auntie Alice Pihima, 4 buckets of karaka that she wanted to eat. So we really need to watch our language around, especially ridiculous books that say, oh, we used to eat, Māori used to eat, Māori do eat, and they still do eat, and we still do grow, and we will harvest, and we, not kōrero, but we will harvest our karaka and our fruits, and we still eat them. So just that's one thing that's eroding our kai, is how we talk about our kai. How do we talk to our children about our kai? And the amount of ridiculous Facebook posts that Māori used to eat these, Māori used to, Māori are still alive. So anyway, just to say, we need to watch our language around our kai. Community gardens and kaimara, this was also really important in the time, right from the beginning. One of the first hui in 2000 with Jodie Warbrick was, can we have a big garden at the marae? It actually took us the longest of all the requests. It was really easy to get pūrere in, and kariao and kēkē and all of those taonga of the ngāhere into the whenua, but it was really hard to start a garden. And what tipped off the first garden, we started at a garden where the nursery was. Lots of people turned up and people didn't turn up again. And we're like, what are we going to do about this? And then I think the pictures that you're seeing now are probably about the third garden. The garden moved around a lot. But what really started off the next one was that Ōrākei and the leadership again with Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, things like Waitangi Day, doing Para Kore and making sure that all composting was kept out of the whenua, out of going directly to landfill. For Whātua to be sending it to Hampton Downs, to Waikato, was just, no, it's not going to happen anymore. We're going to do our best any way we can to correct this. And with that realization, we got all really into Bakashi. We had gone and got inspiration from Waiheke, and we learned about Bakashi, and the Auckland Council had supported that, and we now had all these Bakashi bins. And okay, start Bakashi, and now what? And then the next minute, Hannah's father was building garden beds so we could put the Bakashi somewhere. And we've had several evolutions of community gardens over the years. We learned our lessons as well. If you start a garden in the mara, in the marae grounds, then people were feeling like, oh, they could come and garden, but they didn't want to take them home because that felt like taking them off the marae, and you couldn't go and take away from the marae, so it's to koha to the marae. So there was a whole lot of learnings that we had to work out. We planted fruit trees. We had put in at that stage, I think, 80,000 native plants and 80 fruit trees. So you think we'd be able to look after them, but we kind of got distracted somewhere else. And there was plenty of learnings, and some of them were simply this: if you're going to start something, look after it. You know, like there's plenty of community gardens going on all across Tāmaki, amazing community gardens. And our key learnings are respect the wisdom, kai wisdom that has been held by people across the cities, people like Therese, people like Judy Keats, who's in this photo, people like Trish Allen, people like Dee Panini, Richard Main, I could go on. There are so many people, Rob, the knowledge that is being held by people that are holding this kai wisdom across our city is immense, but we need to support them because so often they are in voluntary roles, or they're just part-time coordinators, or hard to get funding, or this, you know. And so every community garden needs somebody that holds that wisdom, that has the passion to share it, and with that can teach the maintenance and coming back. And as Koha said, relationship, connection, and being there. And Michelle really held that space, bringing in Judy, recognizing that this garden needed that po to be able to share out what they had. And every community garden, in every community nursery as well, there's 45 iwi hapu community native plant nurseries across the region. People like Wyatt are as rare as hen's teeth, trying to get enough quality, amazing, passionate nursery managers is incredibly rare. Getting enough of our kai wisdom holders to be able to nurture our generations are also hard. So we need to grow our people alongside our kai. Don't start where you can't look after. Next slide. Yes, back to the children. This is my hardest. I had slides and slides and slides and slides of children. So, and I can't help myself but to put some of my own in. The important thing with children, again, is about language and around kai and around ngāhere. Why are kids scared to go in the ngāhere? You know, why are they scared to go into the leaflet in case the crawly things will get them? Why are they scared to eat anything? Because some of them might be poisonous. It is our responsibility to understand our ngāhere, what is growing at your front door, what is growing before you get in your car, what is growing on the front berm of your neighbour, understanding what is there. And people say, oh, but where do I start? Well, when you open your door, what is the first tree you see? Is it native? Is it exotic? Can you eat it? Learn what is right with you every day in your home and on your walk to the car or the bus stop, to get on your bike. It's the first thing you cycle past. What is it? Why, when you get off the ferry, you should know you planted them. Down at downtown, you know your ngāhere, know your home, know your whenua. And then from there, learn one at a time. How big does it grow? Can I eat it? Can I not? And tell some children. Tell them about all the juicy ones first. Why we have this picture of taupata on the screen. Everyone knows what taupata is. That's the one with the leaf turned over. It belongs to the same family as karamuramu or karamu. They're two different plants, but they sound the same. All of them have a similar feature, and all the children in this picture know that if you turn them over and they have those holes, that the whole family is okay to eat. A little thing, a simple thing, start somewhere and share it. If we don't get them back eating the kai and the ngāhere, we will not connect again to our food. If people always go, oh, can you eat a pūrere? Nah, not unless you like wood shavings, but kēreru, eat them. So once you work out what you can eat and what you can't eat, you work out next what can. And then we will build one tree at a time again until we reconnect everybody with our ngāhere, what's in it. And if we have respect for that, we'll plant it more, we'll want it more and help our moana. So we just got to keep reviving and rebuilding our ngāhere with our children. Everything on there is edible. Now, I just wanted to say too, I don't know if you can see it on your side screen. I can because I've got a really big one where I am, but I know some of you might have been watching this off a little screen. In the trailer, there's some children. There's a child right at the back pulling the funniest face, so hopefully you can see him. His name is Jaya. He didn't love plants then. He now is one of the most celebrated kaimahi at the nursery up at Te Arai for Te Uriahau, our iwi. And I found that photo and I'm going to send it to him because now I keep getting sent photos of him on the potting table. There's other ones that I've taken out of here since then, since I had a whole lot of photos in here. And I'd actually taken out one of Ngārimu, who's not in these shots, but there's a photo of him when he's only 5, and he's one of our Para Kore crew now too, and his sister is in the trailer. What this photo represents to me is these children have all grown up with the ngāhere on the whenua rangatira. They came back each year. I don't want to test them if they know their plants or not, but I'd hope so. And I think that's the thing with all restoration of our ngāhere and our kai, is that we bring our children along with us for the duration of the project. It's not about just going to do a nice planting day one winter. It would be better to go back to the same tree and watch it grow, to go back and maintain it, to go back and look after it. It used to be that we were happy if children knew where their happy if our children knew where their food came from. My challenge to you all is that's not enough anymore. We need to know not only where our food comes from, but what it is, how diverse it can be, and how well it can grow if we have a relationship with it. So yeah, knowing where your food comes from, that was nice, but we got to go a bit next level on it now. Okay, I think we've got one more. Okay, I love these two. I really just put them with their puha harvest in there to say thank you, because in all the years I was on the whenua, the aunties either love you or growl you, and both of those things is a lesson and an important one. So ngā mihi to Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei actually for having me all those years. very, very privileged, and very privileged to have my babies growing up on that whenua. I'm going to hand it back over to Wyatt. Kia ora.
Just before you hand back, Wyatt, we've got a couple of comments. Sarah's made a comment about people being encouraged to build on good horticultural land. And for me, I think one of the important things is the proximity of food production to where it's eaten. So I wonder if you could just give us some sort of comment on that. And the second thing is the way we are swallowing up those pieces of land. I wonder if that doesn't lead to people losing a connection with the land itself. So would you just like to give us a couple of comments on those things?
Yeah, absolutely. It seems a little bit insane when you watch the news and there's more subdivisions going up on prime productive land, and that's been happening for decades out of Māngere before it has ever started in Pukekoi. So that's been a trend for a long time. There was apple orchards in Albany. When I was a child, there was a signpost at the top of Pupuki Road that said 15 k's to Albany, like it was the next city. Like, ooh, was the yellow AA sign. So yeah, absolutely. As our cities grow, we've lost our orchards. We've lost them in the west. We've lost them in the north. We've lost our fields in Māngere and south, and all our volcanic, a lot of our volcanic growing areas. I don't know how much the people in the heart of the city have lost their connection to food in the whenua when they weren't the market gardeners in those areas. What's criminal is the loss of knowledge in those families that were making their living and from providing food for Tāmaki all of that time, and for us not to acknowledge what a mamai that must be. Just to be pushed out. But there's a citywide thing, and I can't really say much more about that, but that's my initial thought. What I didn't really talk about in mine, because I thought that Hannah and both Koha had covered it really well, is that it doesn't matter where you are, you need to respect your whenua. So whether that's even the whenua that you drag to the rooftop of your apartment building, like I did when I was 19, 3 stories up in no lift, you just have to respect your whenua wherever you are, whatever space you have. So if we've lost the connection to the market gardens for the city katoa, let's bring the market gardens into the city katoa. So the work that Love of Bees are doing and Zero Smarts Kennedy and everyone associated with that is really important. The work that you guys are doing at Paerewa is really important because, and there's what's happening out with Piritahi out on Waiheke as well, and is also as Koha said with Papatuanoku. Where you are, learn where you are, what's come out of the whenua, can go back into the whenua, respect those knowledge holders, learn it, grow it, wherever you are. It's happening over in Kaipariki on the North Shore, it's happening up in Matakana, it's happening in Warkworth, it's happening everywhere. So if we, if I can't do anything about the exchange of what's going out in terms of the growth of the city, but just respect wherever you are in the city, that you look after that whenua there. Grow and collect that seed, that food seed, they're part of the circular economy as well that Koha was talking about, that once you've got it, you might be able to compost it, but the next thing would be to go get some seed and plant that and collect that seed and swap.
Kia ora, Charmaine. Thank you so much for those comments in your presentation, and deep respect for the long involvement you've had with the whenua and whenua rangatira.
Sorry, my last thing would also, which should have been my first thing as well, is to say ngā mihi to Michelle and having this platform as well with the Auckland Climate Festival for us to even have these conversations in this way. Actually, a Zoom I look forward to this week. So, yeah, kia ora.
Kia ora. Okay, so our last speaker for this evening is Wyatt Dooley, and Wyatt is one of the senior managers who's in charge of land restoration, the nursery. In fact, he's a pretty busy chap. He gets involved in most things. So I'll hand you over to Wyatt to talk about the marakai at Pauriwa.
Kia ora koutou, ko Wyatt Dooley toku ingoa, no California aho. Ke te taha toku mama no hapani, ke te taha toku papa no arani. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. So my name's Wyatt. I'm originally from over across the way in the States in California. And yeah, really lucky to call Aotearoa my home. I've been, over here for a little while now, and I guess I'm just so fortunate to, be working with Ngāti Whātua or for Ngāti Whātua, and I'm currently, I guess, in the role that Charmaine started. So ngā mihi Charmaine for all of the amazing work that you and everyone else has done before, and really lucky to, I'm just so fortunate. So I'm going to share, go ahead and share my screen and what we're doing up at Porewa. Come on. Can everyone see my screen? All right, so Charmaine, she was talking a lot about whenua rangatira. She's also done quite a lot of work at Porewa as well. So this is up here in Ōrākei. And so right about over here is where the old nursery used to be, as well as where the community garden was that she had in some of her photos. And since then, that shifted down the way, so down Kupe Street, and now is situated over here in Porewa. So I just wanted to give you a little context of where we are in the world. So the Porewa Marakai, it started off quite a long time ago, as Charmaine talked about, in terms of the community garden up at the marae, as well as, some of the other gardens that she's worked on in the Ōrākei area. But when I guess first came into contact with it, it was, really sparked partially by reading or looking through what is the Ōrākei visual framework. And so that was created, with Xanthi White. And really what the Ōrākei visual framework is just showing, or I guess working with Ngāti Whātua to see, what is the vision for the whenua now and into the future. And out of that came these beautiful images and drawings that just have a real simple statement like marakai or nursery. And it's really left up to, I guess, the individual to create the vision in terms of what that might look like. And so that's where I was first introduced to it. And, really the goal of it was, or is, to, learn to grow, get rangatahi hands in the soil, get whānau members' hands in the soil, get community member hands in the soil, to learn, to cook what we're growing, preserve different traditions, and share food with whānau members. And I'd like to add on, eventually, bring what we share with whānau members in terms of kai, and bring that back to the whenua, as Koha was talking about. So here's an aerial image of the mara before it was created. This is just some of, I guess, the drawings and iterations in terms of making it a reality. And one of the creators, actually the creator, is Rob Small, who's currently our moderator. And what I really wanted to point out with this aerial image is, if you notice that the central circle is in the north, south, east, and west directions. And that's really so we can teach the stories, as well as it helps someone like myself plant, for example, kumara, which was traditionally planted from east to west. And so you can line yourself up, kind of with that east-west main pathway, and make sure that you're, following proper tikanga. So this image, I found this today, was approximately taken 1 year ago. So it was taken on the 28th of October in 2020. And you can see that we're a little bit into the project itself. But, this project was really, I guess, boosted by a response to COVID in terms of we need to start growing food. That way we can get it to whānau members as soon as possible. And so I think we started talking about the project real seriously and getting it off the ground in maybe July of 2020. And then we, I guess, broke ground maybe in October of 2020. And then by February of 2021, this is what it looked like. So it went really quick. That's one thing that I learned, is that things happen really, really fast. So we've produced some incredible kai. I think up to now we've produced over 2,500 kilos of kai from the whenua. That's including everything from, I guess, your more conventional foods like lettuce and basil, as well as really beautiful tomatoes. And you can see Rob in the left-hand side. This is when we were starting to harvest the kumara. But some of those goals is to provide organic, healthy food to whānau. And as I said, it was a response largely in part due to COVID. And we have a really, I guess, our goal is to close that loop by exchanging the kai with whānau members that are just, a few hundred meters away, maybe a little bit further, and in return receive their green waste, which will turn back into the garden as compost that'll feed the mara, and in turn, feed whānau members. So once again, as Koha was talking about, creating that circular loop. And, also it's important to note that we're lowering the carbon miles of the food. So a lot of the food you buy from the supermarket today, say New World or Countdown, is shipped halfway around the world, picked months and months and months ago. Apples maybe 6 months before that, and just put in a cold store. Tomatoes often picked green. They get to a supermarket, they spray them with a chemical to turn them red, to speed it up. And so you're not really getting very nutritious kai, but you're also, really eating food that has a lot of carbon miles. So by having this garden right here in Ōrākei, in Porewa, and being able to distribute this food to whānau members, right up the road, it's walking distance for a lot of people. And so there really isn't any carbon output, which is fantastic, and that ultimately leads to a lower carbon lifestyle. So these photos I wanted to highlight just because they're really significant in that this is some of the first kumara that was planted on the whenua in an extremely long time. So there's two different ways that they were planted on the whenua this last year. You can see on the left-hand side, you can see the mounds or puke, the way kumara was traditionally planted, and then on the right-hand side, the more conventional way, which is in a row. So we're really looking to start growing the traditional kai varieties, such as kumara, riwai, so potato, and we've also gotten a new variety, or I should say a tuturu, old variety of puha, the puha that is endemic to Aotearoa. So for those of you that know what puha is, it's a member of the sunflower family, and a lot of the puha that's commonly grown or seen is actually not native to Aotearoa, but this new variety or old variety that we've gotten is doing extremely well, and so we're really excited to share that with whānau members. I just wanted to highlight some of the food that we've grown. The kumara that we've pulled from the whenua is just absolutely beautiful. And this is another new project that's happening. And so in the center photo, this is Privet, which is considered a noxious weed, originally used for hedging, but spreads extremely well. And Porewa is chock full of it. And what you should know is that across both Porewa and Whenua Rangatira is that there's no sprays. There's no chemicals used, so no Roundup, no glyphosate. So with the help of Charmaine, you have to look at different ways of, tackling these, I guess, pest plants. And what I'd like to say is that maybe we should turn that narrative around and say there's no such thing as a pest plant. In the sense, yes, they do damage, but maybe let's look at it as a resource. Charmaine spoke about the other day taking an invasive plant called Tradescantia. It's a ground cover, commonly seen as a house plant, but has also gone a little bit rogue across the Whenua, and taking that and making beautiful compost out of it. So why do we need to spray, glyphosate everywhere when we can, make beautiful compost? Or in the case of this privet, what we're doing is taking that and using it as a growing substrate for endemic species of mushrooms, which are edible. So on the left-hand side, we have a New Zealand oyster mushroom. And then on the right-hand side is Peke Peke Kiore, which looks like no mushroom you've probably ever seen in a store before, but it's absolutely delicious. And those were both grown on privet. And what's beautiful is that once we harvest that food, or the mushrooms, and give it back to the fauna members, that wrapping is biodegradable, as well as everything that's in there is biodegradable. So that once again goes back into the compost system, goes back to Papatūānuku, which will then allow us to grow more kai off of that, and once again close that loop. So Koha mentioned seed banking before, or actually I should say seed libraries. When a seed bank pops into my head, I think of this real heavy duty seed bank up in the Northern Hemisphere. And in my mind, kind of like a bank, you put it in there, you cash it away, and it never comes out again to see the light of day. But we really need to change the way we think about that, in terms of, yes, it's great, maybe for some things, but, we shouldn't just put a variety into a bank and never look at it again. And we have to remember that those seeds also have a longevity too. They don't necessarily last forever. They have a lifespan, and so they have to be brought out. And that's where seed libraries come in, and we should really look at sharing those varieties, and giving them out to the community. In return, we get some of that seed back, so that way it not only keeps the longevity of that seed, that variety alive, but also, people get to grow delicious kai off of it, or, native plants, which are also kai, and support the wider ecosystem that, supports manu, for example. So yeah, we really need to, change the narrative on that. And I guess one particular thing or example that I would like to bring up is kumara. There's many varieties of kumara in Aotearoa, and a lot of those varieties were lost. I believe Rob has done some research into this, but they were taken originally, or they started disappearing, and they were taken to Japan, and a lot of them disappeared because the person that took them to Japan lost interest, and those have since disappeared. And so there's actually very few kumara varieties left, but we're lucky enough to be growing between 5 and 7 on Porewa. And those are things that those varieties, they don't store forever. If you can imagine a kumara that you buy from the store, that won't last forever, and so you have to start that year after year. So we need people to be kaitiaki of those varieties and protectors, because we don't want to lose them. So what are some things that you can do? I often think the hardest step is often the first step, but it could be something as simple as going to your local supermarket and buying a pack of seeds and having fun on your windowsill. The first time might not necessarily work, but gardening is a lifelong learning experience. I learn new things every single day. Rob, who's my mentor, he always tells me I'm always learning. Gardening is something that you never master, and that's the beautiful thing about it. Another thing that you can do is maybe think twice, before buying, an apple, or some vegetables that came from over in Australia, or came over from, say, Central America, South America. Get involved with a local garden. There's a lot of amazing community gardens out there. And one of the things that really stuck with me when I was talking to Shar recently is that you don't have to remember you're not just one person. You can grab a friend, you can grab 2 friends, and then you're 3 people, and you don't have to do this alone. You can grab a friend, you can grab a family member. So these are one of the many steps that you can take to lead a lower carbon lifestyle. And I just want to say thank you so much for joining this evening, and I hope you really enjoyed it. I know that I have, and thank you so much, Michelle, as well as everyone behind the Auckland Climate Festival. It's just been an amazing time so far, and I hope that you've enjoyed it too. I'll pass it back over to you, Rob.
Ngā mihi, Wyatt, and an interesting thing from me working with people like Wyatt is just how much we learn off each other. And I'm a firm believer that you should always be learning, and I don't know anybody who can't contribute something to my knowledge. A couple of quick questions for you that have come up on the chat line there. Wyatt, do we have animals associated with the garden?
Currently, we don't have any animals associated with the garden. It's something that we've talked about, maybe bringing some back to the whenua. I know Charmaine historically in the past, I believe, had chooks on the whenua, and maybe it's something that we could revitalize, not only for example, beautiful free range organic eggs, but also using them to maybe tend the soil, for example, as well as their manure makes beautiful compost, as well as potential kai for whānau as well. So that's an area that we have been exploring, but haven't, I guess, made moves towards yet.
And a second question came from Geraldine, who's very keen to volunteer. So do we need volunteers in the garden?
Oh, 100%. We love volunteers. We love people to come out and get involved. And as Rob just mentioned, for example, Geraldine, you might come out and show us a heap of new things that nobody else knew. And so the more, many minds make things a lot better, a lot more efficient. So please come out and volunteer.
Thanks so much, Wyatt. I just wanted to add a couple of comments that I had. One of those is that our society, our young people, are losing connection with the land. So groups that are working with schools like Garden to Table and the like are doing an extremely valuable job in reintroducing young people to vegetable growing or to working with plants in any way whatsoever is to me very valuable. And in my career, which has largely been in parks management across New Zealand and Australia, one of the things that I continually come across is people, particularly younger people, losing connection with the land. We call it nature deficit disorder in our children. And if you want a really good text on that, Richard Lowe, who is spelled L-O-U-W, wrote a very good text called Last Child in the Woods. And I really commend that to you. The other thing I just wanted to say is that as we conclude this session, I really enjoyed what Wyatt had written about what we can all do, which is we can eat local, we can eat organic, we can produce our own food. We can be very conscious of that circular flow, because the methane gases released by vegetation that's just left to rot in landfills is very significant as a greenhouse gas. We should really shun packaging as much as we can, and in particular plastics, and we can look at creating our own compost. Somebody during the discussions has asked, how can we fund these things? And there isn't a simple answer for that, but I have a wish that we would go towards collaborative community gardens throughout the city, where in fact these things could, where people could participate And I don't mean the sort of garden where every individual has their own little patch and that's theirs. I really think that it's that manaakitanga. It's that thing where we all get in and do something together. That connects us as well as connecting us to the whenua. Incredibly important. And I have a strong wish to see that become part of our community landscape in the future. So going away from this possessiveness, and the one thing that is dramatically different in Te Reo Māori, in terms of gardens and in terms of the way we approach life in general, is that we have responsibilities as hosts. We have responsibilities to nourish family. We have responsibilities to be gracious and to welcome people and to share. These are really important principles that I think are well worth endorsing in the way we work. So I want to thank our presenters this evening, Hana Maihi, Koha Kahui, Charmaine Bailey and Wyatt Durley. And I hope that from this evening's presentation, and particularly to thank Michelle from the Council for organising this particular event. I don't think it's very easy listening to the presenters this evening who have such a passion for the work they do. So it's very easy for us to get them to talk from the heart about these things. It should leave absolutely no doubt in anybody's mind that we need to reconnect with the earth. We need to reconnect with Papa Tuanuku. We need to understand just what we're putting into our bodies. So with that, I just want to offer you finally a karakia mutunga. Ko rangi ko papa, ka puta ko rongo, ko tāne mahuta, ko tangaro, ko tūmataunga, ko homia tikitiki, ko tāwhiri mātia. Tokona ko rangi ki runga, ko papa ki raro, ka puta ki te whaiau, ki te au marama, ti hei Māori ora.
Māori ora.
Good evening, everybody. Hi.
Ngā mihi. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ngā mihi.
Haki te.
Thanks, Rob.
Hi, poor Mari.
Ngā mihi nui. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful evening.
Are you waiting for them to jump off?
Oh, I don't know if you wanted to say something to me or if you were hanging out.
I was just going to put a plug in for all our tamariki and rangatahi who are fighting for climate change, and but I guess Robbie will have to pick that up on the rangatahi panel later on.
Oh, you should have done it next time. I don't know. What did you think? Did it? Is it?
Oh, I just
all
really
good?
love listening to everybody.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that.
Going down memory lane. Reminds me
Yeah.
of, all the little compost workshops we've done, and yeah, like it all adds up.